The shuttle docked with a heavy metallic groan, and Kira Vasquez grabbed her duffel bag before anyone else had even unbuckled their harnesses. She was the first one off and the last one anyone expected. The orbital station called Talvora Prime stretched out before her like a city floating in the void of space, all sharp angles and glowing corridors and the hum of 1,000 systems running at once. And Kira took it all in with a single slow glance before she started walking. She did not stop to admire anything. Behind her, the other recruits spilled out of the shuttle in a flood of strange shapes and stranger sounds. Tall ones and short ones, scaled and furred and smooth-skinned and crystalline, species from every corner of the galaxy all gathered here for one purpose: to become soldiers of the Galactic Coalition. Kira was the only human. She knew that before she arrived, and she did not care because caring about things she could not change had never been her way. Kept her alive on Earth. The barracks were enormous, a long hall lined with bunks that adjusted automatically to fit whatever species climbed into them. And the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled oxygen, which reminded Kira of hospitals back home, except cleaner. She found her assigned bunk and began unpacking with the kind of mechanical precision that came from years of practice. Every item in its place, every motion efficient, no wasted energy. That was when the whispers started. She heard them the way she heard everything, passively, constantly, the way a person from Earth learned to monitor every sound in their environment, because silence on a death world usually meant something was about to eat you. "That is a human," someone hissed from 3 bunks away, a tall insectoid creature with trembling antennae. "Death world species," another voice added, this one low and gravelly, belonging to a squat rock-skinned Grothian who was pretending not to stare. "Class 12, I heard. The highest rating before they stop counting. I heard they eat poison for fun. I heard their bones break and then grow back stronger. I heard their planet has a molten core, and the ground shakes and splits open, and they just rebuild on top of the rubble." Kira folded her spare uniform and placed it in the storage compartment beneath her bunk. She did not respond to any of it. A small fox-like creature with enormous ears and soft golden fur appeared at the bunk beside hers, and stood there, clutching a bag that was almost as big as she was, her wide dark eyes blinking rapidly in what Kira recognized from her xenobiology studies as a finale stress response. "I am Lyra," the creature said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I am assigned here, beside you. Is that acceptable?" Kira looked at her, and something in her expression must have softened, because Lyra relaxed, just a fraction. Kira said, "And yes, that is fine." Lyra climbed onto her bunk with some difficulty and began arranging her things with the nervous energy of someone who had never been away from home before. "What is Earth like?" Lyra asked after a moment, the curiosity apparently stronger than the fear. Kira paused, a ration pack in one hand, and considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully and without hurry. "Loud," she said finally. That was all. Lyra seemed to want more but did not push, which Kira appreciated, because the full answer to that question involved oceans that could swallow cities, storms that ripped the sky apart, predators that hunted in packs with more tactical awareness than some military units she had read about, and a sun that would burn your skin off if you stood under it too long, and none of that seemed like good conversation for a first meeting. The barracks filled up over the next hour, and Kira watched without appearing to watch, a skill she had learned before she could read. Most of the recruits were from temperate worlds or paradise planets, places where the weather was gentle and the food did not fight back, and the biggest danger was maybe a steep cliff or a mildly venomous insect. Then there was Torvik. He entered the barracks the way a star enters a room, impossible to ignore and fully aware of it. He was Velethri, 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms, and skin the color of burnished copper, and a face that carried the kind of confidence that came from never once in his life being the smallest or weakest thing in any space he occupied. His home world was a paradise planet, with low gravity and no natural predators, and a climate so mild that the concept of weather was basically decorative. He was also the son of Admiral Shalani, a name that apparently meant something to everyone in the room except Kira. Torvek moved through the barracks like he already owned it, greeting recruits with a booming voice and a smile that showed too many teeth, his entourage of fellow Velethri trailing behind him like satellites caught in his gravity. He stopped when he saw Kira. She felt his gaze before she saw it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, and she continued folding her kit without looking up. "This is the Deathworlder," Torvek said, loud enough for the entire barracks to hear. He walked over and stood above her bunk and looked down at her with all four arms crossed and his head tilted in what was unmistakably amusement. "You are smaller than I expected." Kira said nothing. "No claws," he continued, making a show of examining her. "No venom, no armor plating, no natural weapons of any kind that I can see. Tell me, little mammal, what exactly makes your species so frightening?" His entourage laughed on cue. Kira placed the last item in her storage compartment and closed. "The coalition must be desperate," Torvek announced to the room, "if they are recruiting soft little rodents from backwater rocks and calling them soldiers." More laughter, though Kira noticed it was thinner this time, nervous, because some of the other recruits had read the same files she had, and they knew what Class 12 meant, even if Torvek did not care. Kira lay down on her bunk and closed her eyes. She was asleep in under 30 seconds, her breathing deep and even and perfectly controlled, while the rest of the barracks was still buzzing with conversation and anxiety, and the restless energy of first nights in strange places. Lyra watched her from the next bunk, with something between awe and terror, because she had never seen anyone fall asleep that fast, and she was fairly certain it was not normal for any species in the known galaxy. In his office, 3 floors above the barracks, drill instructor Rokan, a scarred reptilian Thyraki who had survived 3 border wars and had the missing eye to prove it, opened the personnel file for the new human recruit. He scrolled past the basics and stopped at one line near the bottom. It read, "Survival rating, ungraded, exceeded testing parameters." He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the file and leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a rare smile. Because tomorrow the combat assessments would begin, and he had a feeling this cohort was about to learn something that every species in the galaxy eventually learned when they met a human for the first time. The universe had not made them strong. It had made them something far worse. It had made them stubborn. The training arena was the size of a small canyon, a circular pit of adaptive flooring that could shift into any terrain at a moment's notice, surrounded by rising tiers of observation seats, where the entire cohort sat, watching like spectators at a gladiator match. The air hummed with tension and the sharp antiseptic smell of the medical drones hovering at the edges of the arena, ready to intervene the moment someone broke something important. Drill instructor Rokon stood at the center of the floor, with his one good eye scanning the recruits above him, and his voice carrying without any amplification, because 30 years of military service had turned his vocal cords into weapons of their own. "Today you fight," he said, "hand to hand, no weapons, no tech, no augmentations, just your body and whatever your species gave you. The arena will match you by weight class and limb count." He paused and let the silence do its work. "We have an odd number. Need 1 volunteer for a cross-class match." The words had barely left his mouth before Torvek stood up in the observation tier, all 8 feet of him unfolding like a tower being assembled in real time, 4 arms spread wide, and a grin splitting his face. "I will do it," he announced, "and I would like to face the human." A ripple went through the crowd, half excitement and half the kind of dread that comes from watching someone walk toward a cliff edge while smiling. Rokan looked at him for a long moment with the flat expression of someone who had seen this exact kind of arrogance before and knew exactly how it ended. "Granted," he said. Kira was already walking down the steps to the arena floor before her name was even called, her movements unhurried, her face carrying the same blank calm she had worn since the day she arrived, like the surface of deep water that gave no indication of what moved beneath it. She stepped onto the mat barefoot, stood with her hands at her sides. Torvek descended to the arena floor like a king entering his court, his forearms rolling through warm-up stretches that were more performance than preparation, each motion designed to remind everyone watching just how much bigger and stronger he was than the small human woman standing across from him. "I want everyone to watch carefully," Torvek called out to the crowd, "because this is the moment we put the Deathworld myth to rest." He dropped into a wide, lazy stance, all forearms open, his weight barely committed, the posture of someone who expected this to be easy and wanted the audience to know it. "Tell me, little mammal," he said to Kira, his voice dripping with amusement, "do humans always look this fragile, or are you a runt of the litter?" Kira did not answer. She rolled her shoulders once. The sound that came from her spine and neck was a rapid series of cracks and pops. Makes when it releases tension from joints that were designed to operate under Earth's punishing gravity. And it echoed through the silent arena like small bones breaking. Several species in the audience physically recoiled, and Lyra covered her enormous ears with both paws. Rokon activated the match timer. The display above the arena began counting. Torvek lunged. He was fast for his size, all four arms sweeping wide in a grappling pattern that had been perfected by the Velethri over centuries, a technique built on the simple math that four arms will always overwhelm two, that reach and mass and numbers win fights, that bigger means better. He was wrong. Kira moved. She did not dodge with elegance or grace. She simply was not where Torvek's arms expected her to be, dropping low and pivoting inside his guard with a speed that the arena's tracking systems lost her for a fraction of a second, her body passing through the gap between his lower arms like water through a crack in stone. She struck once, a single open palm hit delivered with her entire body weight behind it, aimed at a point on Torvek's lower thorax that she had identified 6 months ago in a xenobiology textbook. The exact junction where the Velethri respiratory membrane was thinnest and the nerve cluster beneath it was most exposed. The sound it made was wet and heavy, like a drum filled with sand. Torvek folded. All four of his arms spasmed at once, his lungs seizing, his vision collapsing to a narrowed tunnel of light as his body tried to understand what had just happened to it, and his knees hit the mat with a crack that shook the floor. He could not breathe. Before he could recover or think or even understand that the fight had already changed in ways he could not reverse, Kira was behind him, one arm locked around his primary throat, not crushing, but controlling, the pressure exact and measured, like she had practiced this on something his size before, and her legs wrapped around his torso with a grip that used Earth-trained muscles, accustomed to fighting a gravity that would kill most species in the galaxy. She squeezed. Not enough to end him, not enough to damage anything, just enough to make him understand in every cell of his body that the only reason he was still conscious was because she had chosen to allow it. Torvek tapped out. His forehands slapped the mat in the universal signal of surrender, each hit more desperate than the last. Kira released him instantly, and stood up and walked off the mat without a word, without celebration, without even looking back at the 8-foot warrior gasping on the floor behind her. The match timer read 6 seconds. The arena was silent in a way that silence is not usually silent. Not just quiet, but hollow. The kind of silence that happens when an entire room of people simultaneously realizes that something they believed to be true is not. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. In the observation tier, Lyra sat with her paws pressed against her mouth, and her enormous eyes wide and unblinking, and one single thought repeating in her mind, like an alarm. She was not angry, Lyra thought. That is what is terrifying. She was not angry at all. She was calm. She was calm the entire time. Rokon let the silence stretch for exactly as long as it needed to, and then he stepped to the center of the mat and looked up at the rows of stunned faces above him. "Now you understand," he said, his voice quiet and carrying more weight for it, "why the Coalition classifies planets." He resumed the assessment schedule as if nothing remarkable had happened. 3 hours later, in the medical bay, Torvek lay on a treatment bed, staring at the ceiling, while a finale medic ran a scanner over his torso. "Nothing is broken," the medic said, "but the bruise on your thorax will take several weeks to fully heal." Torvek looked down at his chest, where a dark purple mark had already bloomed across his lower ribs, perfectly shaped, every line and ridge preserved in the damaged tissue. It was the shape of a human hand. "How did she know where to hit me?" he asked, and his voice was quiet in a way it had never been before. The medic pulled up Kira's file and scrolled through it. "She studied xenobiology for 6 months before enlisting," the medic said, "specifically the anatomy of every species currently serving in the Coalition military." Torvek closed his eyes. "She knew your body better than you do," the medic added, not unkindly. In the barracks that night, the other recruits gave Kira a wide circle of empty space wherever she went. Not out of disrespect, but out of something older and deeper than respect. The same instinct that every prey species in the galaxy carried in its bones. The one that said, "Do not attract the attention of the thing that is calm when it should be afraid." Kira ate her dinner alone and cleaned her boots and went to sleep in 30 seconds. And in the bunks around her, an entire cohort of aliens lay awake in the dark, thinking about what they had seen, thinking about what it meant, thinking about the fact that somewhere in the galaxy, there was an entire planet full of creatures like her. An entire planet. The thought kept them up for hours. The weeks that followed changed everything, and they changed it quietly. The way water reshaped stone, not with violence, but with patience and persistence, and the slow, undeniable pressure of something that simply refuses to stop. Kira did not become a legend because of the arena. She became one because of everything after it. The first thing the cohort learned was that the fight with Torvek was not the most terrifying thing about Kira Vasquez. It was not even close. Because the truly unsettling things were the small ones, the casual ones, the things she did every day without thinking, that reminded everyone around her that she had been built by a world that wanted her dead from the moment she was born. It started with food. The mess hall incident became the stuff of barracks legend within 48 hours, and it went like this. Kira sat down at a table with her ration tray and pulled a small bottle from her jacket pocket and shook red powder onto her meal. And began eating. Within 2 minutes, the recruits on either side of her began coughing. Within 5 minutes, the entire table had evacuated. Within 10 minutes, a hazmat protocol had been triggered, and 3 recruits were being treated for what the medical team initially classified as a chemical weapons exposure, before someone ran a scan on the red powder and discovered it was capsaicin, a compound found in earth plants that humans consumed recreationally, and that was technically classified as a chemical irritant by Coalition safety standards. Kira had not noticed any of this because she was still eating. "You put poison on your food," Lyra said later, her nose twitching, "on purpose, for enjoyment." "It is not poison," Kira said. "It is a spice." The medical team used the word neurotoxin. They are being dramatic. Then there was the sleeping. Every species in the galaxy had some version of a rest cycle, but none of them could do what Kira did, which was fall asleep anywhere, in any position, at any time, within 30 seconds, and wake up at full alertness with 0 transition period. She slept sitting upright in briefing rooms. She slept on bare metal floors during equipment maintenance breaks. She once fell asleep standing up during a 10-minute pause in a field march, and nobody noticed until the march resumed, and she simply opened her eyes and started walking again, without missing a step. "How?" asked a Grothian recruit named Belloc, a massive stone-skinned creature who needed 9 hours of motionless rest per cycle and still woke up groggy. "Earth predators do not schedule their attacks around your sleep cycle," Kira said, "so you learn to rest when you can and wake when you must." Belloc thought about that for a long time, and then decided he was glad he had not been born on Earth. But the thing that truly changed the cohort's understanding of what a Deathworlder was came during the survival simulation. Ro-Khan dropped them into a simulated toxic jungle biome, a nightmare of dense vegetation and acidic rain and bioluminescent predator analogs that hunted by heat signature, and he told them the exercise was designed to last 2 days. Kira's team finished in 9 hours. She walked into the jungle, and within 10 minutes she had identified 7 edible plants by cross-referencing their chemical signatures with her own knowledge of toxic and non-toxic organic compounds. 3 usable poisons that could be applied to improvised weapons. A fresh water source hidden beneath a root system that no other species would have thought to check. And a defensible position with natural sight lines in 4 directions. Her team sat in stunned silence while she built a fire using friction and dead wood, a technique so primitive and so effective that the Thyraki observer monitoring the exercise actually pulled up her species file to confirm he was not watching a hallucination. "She made fire," he reported to Ro-Khan, "with sticks." "Yes," Ro-Khan said, "they do that." And then there was the running. During a long-range patrol exercise designed to test endurance across a 20-kilometer course, every species in the cohort hit their wall at some point. The Velethri with their Paradise World stamina lasting maybe 2 hours at pace. The Grothians with their mass burning through energy reserves like furnaces. The Finale with their small frames and rapid heartbeats fading within the first hour. Kira jogged. She did not sprint. She was not the fastest. Several species could outrun her in a short burst without effort. But Kira did not stop. She jogged at a steady, even pace for 14 hours. 14 hours. The medical monitors attached to her showed elevated heart rate and steady oxygen consumption and lactic acid levels that would have hospitalized most species, but that her body simply processed, recycled, and kept going. Because that was what humans were. That was the thing the galaxy never understood about Earth. It had not made humans strong, or fast, or armored, or venomous. It had made them persistent. It had made them the kind of predator that did not chase its prey down, but simply followed it at a walking pace until the prey collapsed from exhaustion and fear and the terrible dawning realization that the thing behind it would never ever stop. 14 hours, and Kira crossed the finish line and stretched and asked if there was food. Torvik had dropped out at hour 3. He spent those weeks in a quiet kind of exile, his entourage gone, his confidence shattered, avoiding Kira not out of hatred anymore, but out of a shame so deep it had changed the way he carried himself. His 4 shoulders hunched inward, his voice lower, his eyes on the floor. And then the night exercise happened. It was supposed to be routine, a simple squad movement through a simulated urban environment. But one of the Velethri recruits from Torvek's former circle triggered a sim mine and was declared killed, and suddenly the simulation was not routine anymore. Panic hit the squad like a wave. Recruits scattered, training evaporated. 3 species began producing stress pheromones that made the situation worse, and Torvek froze in the middle of the street with all 4 arms locked at his sides and his eyes wide and empty. He had never been truly afraid before in his entire life, and he did not know what to do with the feeling. Kira did. She moved through the chaos like a knife through smoke, her voice cutting through the noise with commands that were short and clear and left no room for hesitation. Belloc, grab the casualty and move left. Lyra, ears up and tell me what you hear to the north. Torvik, move. She dragged Torvik into cover by one of his 4 arms and organized a counterattack on the simulated enemy position, and completed the objective, and saved every remaining member of the squad. In the debrief, Rokan named her acting squad leader, and nobody objected, not even the recruits who were twice her size. Later that night, Torvik found her cleaning her gear in the empty training room. He stood in the doorway for a long time before he walked in, and the sound of his footsteps was the sound of someone approaching something they were afraid of, not because it might hurt them, but because it might show them a truth about themselves they were not ready to see. "How do you stay calm?" he asked. Kira looked up at him, and her face was the same as it always was, steady, even, unreadable. "On Earth," she said, "if you panic you die, so you learn not to." Torvik absorbed that. "You froze tonight," Kira said, and it was not an accusation, but a diagnosis. "That is not weakness, that is inexperience. You have never been afraid before, and that is not your fault." She paused. "But if you want to fix it, I can help." It was not forgiveness, Torvik realized. It was something harder than forgiveness. It was a hand extended without conditions by someone who had every reason to let him fail, and had chosen not to. Not because she was kind, but because that was how humans survived, together. He sat down across from her, and for the first time in his life, he listened. She taught him breathing exercises that humans use to control fear responses, and he taught her the Lethri 4-armed grappling techniques. And somewhere in the exchange, something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but the beginning of something that might become friendship, if given enough time. In the doorway, Lyra watched them with her enormous dark eyes, and smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the academy. Because she was beginning to understand something that the rest of the galaxy would eventually learn too. Were not dangerous because of what they could destroy. They were dangerous because of what they could build. The final exam was not a test. It was a war. Rokan briefed them in the pre-deployment chamber with the lights dimmed, and a holographic map of the combat zone rotating slowly behind him. A cratered moon surface with toxic atmosphere pockets and jagged terrain and zero room for error. 72 hours, he said. Full contact, live fire with non-lethal rounds that will still break bones if they hit you wrong. You are one platoon of junior cadets against a full company of seniors who have done this before, and who want to crush you because that is what seniors do. He let that settle. Failure means recycling, which means you do this entire training cycle again, from the beginning. Every one of you. He looked at them, and his one good eye lingered on Kira. Out there, nobody cares what world you are from. You survive together, or you fail alone. The first 24 hours nearly destroyed them. The senior cadets were everything Rokan had promised, experienced, and coordinated, and ruthless in the specific way that people who have already proven themselves are ruthless, with nothing to prove, and everything to protect. And they hit Kira's platoon like a hammer hitting glass. They pinned them down in a ravine within the first 6 hours, picked off 3 recruits with precision fire from elevated positions, jammed their communications, and cut their supply lines with surgical efficiency. By hour 12, morale was a memory. By hour 18, the platoon was scattered across 2 kilometers of broken terrain, with no comms, and no plan, and no idea where the enemy was. And Kira could see in their faces the same look she had seen on Earth in the eyes of animals that had given up. The flat, empty stare of something that had decided it was already dead. She gathered them in a crater that provided enough cover to breathe, and she stood in the center, and looked at every single one of them, one by one. "Turn off your tech," she said. "Silence. All of it. Comms, scanners, HUD systems, night vision, everything powered down right now." Belloc the Grothian stared at her. "You want us to go dark, completely dark, in hostile territory with no way to communicate?" "Yes. That is insane. That is how my species won wars for 10,000 years before we had electricity." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to, because there was something in the way she said it that was more convincing than volume. A certainty that came from a lineage of survivors so long and so unbroken that it had become encoded in her DNA. They turned off their tech. What followed was something that the Academy's observation team would later describe in their official report as unprecedented, and that the senior cadets would later describe using words that were considerably less professional. Kira transformed the platoon into ghosts. The position of the stars and the angle of shadows on the crater walls. Techniques so ancient that no species in the Coalition had used them in centuries. Because why would you navigate by starlight when you had quantum positioning systems? Except that quantum positioning systems could be jammed, and the stars could not. She taught them to communicate with hand signals and body language, and the subtle art of moving through a group like a thought passing between neurons, each member aware of the others without a single word spoken. She used every member of the squad for exactly what their species did best. Belloc, with his stone skin, became a living barricade and a battering ram, positioned at choke points where his mass and durability turned narrow passages into death traps for anyone trying to push through. Lyra, with her enormous finale ears, became the early warning system, her hearing so acute that she could detect footsteps on loose gravel from 300 meters away, and for the first time in her life she felt essential rather than fragile, necessary rather than tolerated. A Firaki recruit, whose cold-blooded metabolism made him nearly invisible to thermal sensors, became their scout, slipping through enemy lines like a shadow wearing scales. And Torvek with his forearms and his raw Velithri strength, became the engineer. And under Kira's direction, he built mechanical traps from salvaged equipment and natural materials, deadfalls and tripwires and snares that used physics instead of power cells, and that the senior cadets had no protocol for, because nobody in the modern military built traps out of rocks and wire anymore. Nobody except humans. Over the next 48 hours, Kira's platoon took the senior cadets apart, piece by piece. They ambushed a supply convoy in a canyon, using a rock slide triggered by Belloc's fist, hitting a stress point that Kira had identified by reading the fracture lines in. They captured an enemy scout by having Lyra pinpoint his position from the sound of his breathing, and then having the Firaki recruit appear behind him, so silently that the scout's first indication he was not alone was a non-lethal round pressing against the back of his head. They turned the senior's own communication network against them by feeding false signals through a captured radio that Torvek had rewired, with 4 hands working simultaneously while Kira dictated coordinates. The senior cadets had trained for doctrine and formations and standard tactical responses. They had not trained for this. They had not trained for an enemy that fought like a biosphere, adaptive and unpredictable and relentless. An enemy that did not follow rules, because the planet that made it did not have rules, only survival. By hour 60 the senior company had lost half its strength, and the other half was rattled in a way that experienced soldiers are not supposed to be rattled, jumping at shadows, second-guessing every position, unable to predict what the junior platoon would do next, because the junior platoon was being led by a Deathworlder, and Deathworlders did not think like anyone else. The final objective was the enemy command post, a fortified bunker on a ridge with clear sight lines in every direction, and enough firepower to shred a frontal assault. Kira studied it from a kilometer away through a pair of unpowered optical lenses, another ancient human tool that still worked when everything else was jammed. "We cannot take that head on," Belloc said. No, Kira agreed. So we will not. Torvek, I need you to be loud. Torvek looked at her, and a grin spread across his face. The first real grin she had seen from him since the arena. You want me to be the distraction? I want you to be a nightmare. Take Belloc and the Thyrakai scouts and hit that ridge from the east with everything you have. Make them think the entire platoon is coming through the front door. And while they are focused on me, Lyra and I go through the drainage system on the north side. It is too small for most species, but not for a finale, and not for a human. Torvek laughed, a real laugh, full and deep, and carrying none of the arrogance it once held. Finally, he said, something I am good at. The assault was chaos in its most beautiful form. Torvek charged the ridge with a war cry that registered on the seismic sensors from half a kilometer away. All four arms swinging, Belloc thundering beside him like a living avalanche, and the senior cadets turned every weapon they had toward the eastern approach, because how could they not? It sounded like the world was ending. And while they were focused on the storm at their front door, Kira and Lyra crawled through a drainage pipe that was barely wider than Kira's shoulders, moving in absolute darkness, in absolute silence. For 40 minutes, Lyra was terrified, her whole body trembling, her breath coming in short, rapid bursts that Kira could hear in the darkness. You are doing well, Kira whispered. I am so scared, Lyra whispered back. I know, keep moving. And Lyra did, because Kira had asked her to. And somewhere in the past weeks, that had become enough. They emerged behind the enemy lines, and Kira neutralized 3 sentries in silence, each one taken down with precise non-lethal strikes that put them on the ground before they knew she was there. And then Lyra, small, trembling, terrified Lyra, who had arrived at this academy afraid of her own shadow, planted the signal charge on the enemy commander's position, and pressed the detonation trigger with shaking paws. The exercise ended. The platoon had won. They were the first junior cohort to defeat a senior force in the Academy's recorded history. The platoon erupted in celebration, had never touched each other, embracing in the crater-scarred moonlight. Torvek lifting Lyra onto his broad shoulders, while she laughed in a high, bright voice that echoed off the rocks. Belloc slamming his stone fists together in a Grothian victory salute that cracked the ground beneath him. Kira stood apart and watched, and for the first time since she had arrived at Thalvora Prime, she smiled. In his observation post, Rokan opened his final report and typed a single assessment that would be read by every senior officer in Coalition Command. Cohort 7742, exceptional. Recommend all members for advanced placement. Special note on human recruit Vasquez. She did not make them fight like a human. She made them fight like a unit. That is far more dangerous. 6 months after a shuttle had dropped a quiet human woman onto an orbital station full of aliens who did not know what to make of her, the cohort of Training Class 7742 stood in formation in the Grand Assembly Hall of Thalvora Prime, and they looked nothing like the strangers who had arrived. They stood like soldiers. They stood like a unit. The hall was enormous, a cathedral of polished metal and projected starlight, its domed ceiling transparent, so that the galaxy itself served as the backdrop for the ceremony. Billions of stars burning in the black, like a reminder that all of this, the training and the pain and the fear and the triumph, was in service of something larger than any one species or any one world. The recruits wore the silver insignia of Coalition Special Operations candidates pinned to their chests, a distinction that most cohorts never earned, and that this one had earned in a way that would be studied by Academy instructors for years to come. Senior officers lined the stage, admirals and generals from a dozen species, their uniforms heavy with the decorations of long careers, and among them sat Admiral Shalani of the Velathri Fleet Command, Torvek's father, a towering figure whose 4 arms rested on the arms of his chair, with the practiced stillness of someone who controlled warships the way other people controlled their breathing. He watched his son standing in formation, and he saw something in the way Torvek held himself that had not been there before. A steadiness, a groundedness, the posture of someone who had been broken down and rebuilt into something stronger. He did not know yet what had caused it, but he intended to find out. The ceremony proceeded with military precision, awards given in order of merit, each recipient stepping forward to receive their commendation from the commandant of the academy, an ancient Thyraki female whose scales had gone white with age and whose voice still carried the authority of someone who had personally ended 2 wars. When she reached the final award, the hall went quiet in a way that told Kira everyone already knew what was coming. The Thalvora Commendation, the commandant said, is the highest honor this academy can bestow upon a recruit. It is given not for individual excellence alone, but for the demonstration of leadership that elevates every soldier in the unit, that transforms a group of individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. She paused and looked directly at Kira. Recruit Kira Vasquez, Earth Sol System, step forward. Kira stepped out of formation and walked to the stage with the same unhurried stride she used for everything. The walk of someone who had learned long ago that rushing attracted predators, and that calm was a weapon more powerful than speed. She climbed the steps and stood before the commandant, and the old Thyraki pinned the golden insignia to her chest, with hands that were surprisingly gentle. "Congratulations," the commandant said quietly, for Kira's ears only. "I have been running this academy for 43 years, and I have given this award 11 times. 3 of those times it has gone to a human. I am starting to see a pattern." Kira nodded once, a short, precise motion that carried more weight than any speech. She returned to formation. The ceremony ended, and the cohort dispersed into the celebration that followed, the hall filling with conversation and laughter and the particular joy that comes from surviving something difficult, alongside people you did not choose, but would now choose without hesitation. Kira slipped away from the crowd, because crowds had never been her environment, and found her way to the observation deck on the station's upper ring, a quiet place with a wide viewport that looked out at the stars. She stood there, with her hands clasped behind her back, and her reflection ghosting in the glass, a small figure against an infinite backdrop, and she breathed. This was the first time she had been still in 6 months, truly still, not the tactical stillness of a soldier conserving energy, but the genuine stillness of a person allowing themselves a moment to exist without purpose. Footsteps behind her, heavy and multiple. Torvek. He came to stand beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke, because they had reached the kind of understanding where silence was not empty, but full, a shared space that did not need to be filled. He was still taller than her by nearly 3 feet, and wider by twice her breadth, and stronger in every measurable physical dimension, and none of that mattered anymore, because somewhere in the past 6 months, the distance between them had stopped being about size. "I owe you an apology," Torvek said finally. Kira looked up at him. "Not for the arena," he continued, and he touched his lower thorax, where the handprint bruise had long since faded, but the memory had not. "You already made me pay for that." A ghost of a smile crossed Kira's face. "For what I said when you arrived," Torvek said, and his voice was steady, but his upper right hand was clenched in a fist at his side, in the Velethri tell for emotional vulnerability. "I called you small and fragile, and a rodent from a backwater rock. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Kira shook her head slowly. "You are not entirely wrong," she said. "I am small. Compared to most species here, I am small, and I am fragile. Torvek, humans break easily. Our bones crack, our skin tears, our organs fail. We are not built to last." She turned to face him fully. "We just do not stay broken." The words hung in the air between them like something solid, something you could hold. Torvik extended one of his 4 hands, his primary right, the one the Velethri used for bonds of deep respect. "Come from," he said, "Earth. Is it really as dangerous as they say?" Kira took his hand, and the size difference was almost absurd. Her small human fingers wrapped in his massive copper-skinned palm, and she shook it with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "Worse," she said, "our oceans crush you with pressure. Our mountains freeze you to death. Our deserts cook you alive. Our forests are full of things with teeth and venom and claws, and most of them are not even the most dangerous thing there, because the most dangerous thing on Earth has always been the weather." She paused, but it taught us something that the rest of the galaxy never had to learn. What? That the universe is trying to kill you, always, every moment of every day, and the only answer that works is to look it in the eye and refuse. Torvik held her gaze, and in that moment he understood something about humans that he would carry with him for the rest of his career. Through battles and promotions and the long, quiet years of peacetime that followed. That their strength was not strength at all. It was something older and deeper and more frightening. It was the absolute bone-deep cellular refusal to accept that they were beaten. They stood together at the viewport and watched the stars, and neither of them felt the need to say anything else. 2 floors below in the communications bay, Lyra sat at a terminal, composing a message home. She had changed in ways that were visible even through a text transmission, her words carrying a confidence that had not been there 6 months ago, her sentences structured with the clean efficiency of a trained military communications specialist rather than the scattered nervousness of a frightened girl from a gentle world. "Dear Mother," she wrote, "I have graduated. I am assigned to Coalition Special Operations as a communications specialist. I am safe, and I am strong, and I want you to know that I am serving alongside a human." The response came faster than expected, her mother's words bright with alarm. "A Deathworlder," her mother wrote. "Are you in danger, Lyra? Please tell me you are being careful." Lyra read the message and laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine and carried none of the fear that used to live in every breath she took. She typed her response with steady pause. "No, Mother. For the first time in my life, I am the furthest thing from it, because the most dangerous thing in this galaxy is standing between me and anything that would try to hurt me. And she does not even charge for it. She just does it because that is what humans do." She sent the message and leaned back in her chair and looked out the small viewport beside her terminal at the stars that now felt less like an endless void and more like a road. And somewhere far below the station, in the filing systems of the Galactic Coalition Military Command, a report sat in there. Priority queue, waiting to be read by every admiral and general and strategic planner in the fleet. It contained Rokan's assessment of Cohort 7742, and it contained Kira's service record, and it contained a single recommendation at the bottom of the final page that would shape Coalition military doctrine for the next century. It read, "Recommend immediate expansion of Deathworld recruitment programs. 1 human changed this cohort. Imagine what 1,000 could do." And across the galaxy in every direction, on 1,000 gentle worlds orbiting 1,000 kind stars, 1,000 species had built their civilizations in safety and comfort and peace, nurtured by planets that gave them everything they needed and asked for nothing in return. And then there was Earth, a world of fire and ice and storm and predator, a world that offered nothing freely and punished every mistake with death, a world that had taken a small, soft, fragile species with no claws and no venom, no armor, and had beaten it and burned it and frozen it and drowned it and starved it for 200,000 years. And that species had looked up at the stars and said, "No, we are not done. We are going up there, and you cannot stop us." They did not come as conquerors. They came as something the galaxy had never seen before and would never fully understand. They came as the ones who refused to stop. And that was enough to change everything.